was just asking.
Okay.
That's funny.
Thank you.
I
No,
just
because
hold against me.
I'll have everybody answer if that's okay with everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, SJ.
Okay, because one of as just add on to what Kendall were able to sum this up, but it's not the matter of being precise or loose about being able to trace back into the same idea of number of not. It's the matter of having a framework that you could actually put it up into place when we have a conversation with clients. Because rather than saying supply chain, yes, in procurement, rather than that, we could actually have a reference point. Hey, if we go to 4.0, deliver service and products, and we have 4.2, which is, procure, order and materials and services, which is procurement. Hey, under 4.2, we have 4.2.2, which is managed supplies. And here, this is where you will like to look at all the processes. And because that way, when we have the conversation and interaction with all the petitioners, they'll know right away after looking at the particular process and the framework, why in numeric order, they'll kind of have the idea, oh, so these are all the processes and activities within that particular process buckets. All right, yeah, that makes sense. Hey, but does this include that here? So where does it go to? So it's actually more of a, let's say, a starting point. So, and to agree with Kendall, it's not being precise or loose. It's the framework, numerical hierarchy that really comes into play to ease the conversation with the petitioners. And Kendall and Carol, if I said it wrongly, please correct me.
No, I agree with you. It's exactly that. But I have a question. So sorry, I might miss some part of the previous conversation. So my question to you is, we do have a general framework, right? So like the one that we are currently using, the 6.0 or 7.1, whatever, that is the master framework. And what we're trying to do now is to include to that framework new processes from sectors or new processes that are standard to sectors. Like I know there is a new process that is warranties, for example, that is not in our current PCF, but warranties could be applied to any type of sectors, correct? Do you have kind of a new master?
Sorry, Carolina. Yeah, this is actually a very interesting problem because the way that the warranty section was defined originally was very focused on automotive warranties as opposed to construction of a building or a software product or makeup or something like that. So the risk that we face is that while we've defined automotive warranties very comprehensively, it may not apply as transparently to a different industry.
Okay.
That may just require some additional elaboration.
Right. So you currently have one cross-industry PCF and a different automotive PCF and a different, I don't know, retailer PCF, right? That is how you currently work.
Yes, there are a variety of industry-specific frameworks, and there are measures associated with about 4 or 5 different frameworks. So there's measures associated with the healthcare payer, which is the health insurance framework. There's retail, automotive, cross-industry, and I feel like I'm missing another one, but let's just say 4 for right now.
But you still have a master PCF that is the cross-industry one.
Well, and I want to set the expectation for the quote-unquote master PCF. The master PCF doesn't include the elements that are specific to particular industries. So the cross-industry PCF doesn't include things that are unique to automotive or unique to healthcare payer or banking. That was the other one that I mentioned, or I forgot to mention. So the problem, there's 2 problems that we're trying to solve. One of them is the first problem that Kendall identified, which is when you identify a series of KPIs and you send them to the client needs to know the scope and the mapping to make sure they're getting an apples to apples comparison. That's one problem. The second problem is, how do I find those KPIs in the first place? So for example, if I'm looking for warranty KPIs and I know that I can be tolerant of things that aren't specific to my industry, I just want to get some general idea, how do I find that? And once I have it, do I get the very tight scope that I need, which is kind of the second problem. So if we look at the two problems, that's how we informed the first solution that we proposed, which was to create an abstraction that allowed us to map any taxonomy into it. But I think it missed the point that SJ rose, which is that the context is very important. So if we give somebody the definition of something, we have to give them also the context of where it sits in its general position and how it fits, etc. So I think that the next solution that we'll have to come up with will have to be respectful of a broader context solution as opposed to just a very simple taxonomy that's independent of all of these things. And I think that Carolina, you actually make a very good point when you say it's a master framework. And I think that's hearing those words and how you describe what you need. I think that we're getting closer to what that solution may be that respects both SJ and Kendall's needs as they've expressed them. And I think that we can, like, just for a hypothetical, the warranty process. In the cross-industry framework, we have a process category at the highest level called deliver products and another one called deliver services. We could make a decision that we would align those metrics in the warranty space, even though they came from the automotive framework, we would align them to the cross-industry framework at a particular point so that you have one base master framework that consolidates all of the metrics and allows you to find them in that centralized repository very easily. But it aligns to the core PCF as its sort of requirement. And then as you found the metric that happened to be for automotive warranty, or the KPI, as you pull the KPI, it also will pull up that detailed, rich definition of the scope of what it is and give you guidance as to how you could find the rest of the context.
I think that's what we're looking for, because at current moment, the PCF that we use, which is 6.0 and to 7.0, does not include the other specific or sector specific PCF into consideration. So we can't say that that is a master file. But if we could have the master file, which includes what you just mentioned, all of those sector PCF variants within that master file to be found at the same location, yes, then that would be a good solution for us, because we have everything in there. We have all the framework, all the metrics could be mappable in that particular master file, and then that could be also used because it has a hierarchical format.
Right. And SJ, that's the vision that I'm hearing you articulate, but I want to solve a couple of key problems that will come about when we do this. And that kind of gets into my number 2 and number 3 sort of issues. So I'll give you a concrete example of this particular problem. In version 6.0, 6.1, 6.1.1, that whole 6th generation of PCFs, there were 12 categories. In the 7th generation of PCFs, there are 13 categories. So that is a fundamental difference, and merging those two together into a single master framework would be very confusing. So I believe that your solution has to be that you take the hit, so to speak, of migrating to some new framework whenever we release a massive change like that. Mm-hmm. So let's say that your master framework is now going to be PCF 7.1 or 7.2.1, which is the most current one that's out there, and it has the 13 categories. But the work that we could do to merge in the metrics that aren't aligned to that framework. For example, the ones that were aligned specifically to the old category 4, we could put them with a caveat into the new category 4 to allow them to be found. And then as you find them in that new category 4, they expose their exact definition of how they were collected. So you could go to category 4 in version 7.2.1 and see the measure that aligned to what your consultants were expecting. And then as they get into the details to get that apples to apples comparison, they could make the decision of how they wanted to work with the client to include or exclude activities and costs and whatnot.
I'm trying to digest.
Yeah, I think I could.
I'm trying to
Yeah,
see if
so
there's a way that I could visualize it.
Okay.
yeah, that's what I'm thinking of too. That might help. Because if we move to 7.2, like we had talked about, I mean, there's some massive changes that need to take place on our side. You know, just from communication training, we have a lot that's wrapped around the existing PCF and the existing hierarchy. So I guess if we did upgrade, the question is how any changes in the future. So you move to a 7.3, you move to a 7.4, we have to continue to adjust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's definitely a concern. And that's kind of what I was getting at with number 2 is we could minimize, and as of right now, we don't have any plans to do sweeping changes like we did from 6 to 7. But there will be changes as we, move things around for digital transformation and for handling master data and, things that people observe as being missing from the framework, we try to customize. There will be changes. But we would basically say that the changes that we make would be considered minor changes, and then you would make a decision that as we made a major change, you might want to adopt just the major change, and that would roll up all these little minor changes. You could do them like every other year, for example.
What if, and SJ had this idea, what if we have it EY taxonomy? So SJ, your idea of having an EY taxonomy, that anytime APQC you have a change or an upgrade or whatever, you would map it for us into our stagnant taxonomy.
Yes.
That'd be great. Yeah.
So that's where. So what
Wouldn't it though? Aren't we worth it? Come on.
No, I'm serious. That actually would solve this problem on a number of levels. And if you look at the two problems, the two core problems, one of them is how do we find things, and the other one is how do we define things.
Right.
Creating your own custom EY taxonomy that APQC maintained the mapping for solves the first problem very clearly of how do we find things, because your EY taxonomy becomes the language that your team uses to understand things.
Right.
So whenever somebody said, oh, it's accounting or it's payroll is always going to be under the finance part. It's never going to be under the HR part. And that's just how you guys would communicate. And we would be, I think, we would support the development of that taxonomy. And, there are different levels of how much support we give, but building taxonomies is kind of our thing. So we're kind of good at it. But, we could support the development of your taxonomy to meet your needs long term. The mapping exercise, I think, is, it's something we could also do very, very easily. And again, it solves that first problem. The second problem of, what does this mean? I think we have a really good solution figured out for that in aligning, and if you scroll down to the bottom, Kathy, of this document, you'll see exactly what I mean. Aligning the specific scope to the specific document. So, and if you actually keep going up, stop right here. Yeah, PCF decomposition for 10.4.15. So this string of text that begins at that PCF decomposition for 10.4.15, this would accompany any measure that was collected under the scope of 10.4.15, and it would explain exactly the PCF hierarchy, so you can see 611 and then all the children, and then if there was any definitions aligned to that hierarchy, it would be included as well. And we put that with every measure now. So in our measure master file, we're giving you the definition of how this was collected. So it answers that second question right at the point of need.
And that kind of goes into, I think, the later question about collecting measures for 6.0. From what I've heard, the metrics as tagged to 6.0 are not being collected because it's being collected in a newer version of PCF, or is it just, for example, total transportation cost per $1,000 revenue? I know we have that in 6.0, but as you advance and further go into 2019 and also later on, you say you will not be collecting data on version 6.0. However, that what you're saying is the total transportation cost per $1,000, the data will be collected, but it's just not tagged to PCF version 6.0, but maybe rather a different PCF, right?
Yeah, I think there is probably an exercise that we could do to try and revisit the mapping of some of those process elements. You know, like for example, transportation cost is sufficiently broad that it aligns basically to a logistics PCF ID. And our original goal with these numbers was that when we assign something to a number, that number kept it consistent. There are some cases where the alignment of a PCF to a metric and vice versa is not supposed to be as strong as we've enforced it. So we can relax that requirement for some measures like that one, because it would align perfectly to a 7.2 process element. Transportation doesn't go away. It hasn't disappeared in the PCF. It just has a different scope than it did in the previous version. So I think that there's an exercise we can do to go revisit some of those scopings, and for the ones that aren't bound so or tightly coupled to the process framework, like transportation, for example, that's very broad, I think we can move that to the next version in cases where it isn't presently there. Does that make sense, SJ?
Oh, yes and no.
Yeah, I don't know. Where does that cover the collection, though?
Yeah, that's
The future collection. Yeah.
Sure. And for the future collection, it's important to know that we still collect things using old data collection instruments. Like, for example, we have an internal controls survey that hasn't been updated in a number of years, and it's aligned to the oldest PCF we have out there. And that's available on our website. Any of our members can go participate and collect data in it as whenever they want. So that's how you see like the 1s and 2s of survey changes going up, is because people participate in that old data collection. As far as refreshing, major swaths of data, I believe that Kathy and I and David are working on a plan to address some of that. I think the heat map sort of concept is something that we're looking into. Kathy, I don't want to.
Yeah, so Kendall, the heat map that you guys, so some of the stuff, like John said, still gets collected against various PCFs because the definitions haven't changed.
Mm-hmm.
And then what we've been doing is looking at the heat map that you gave us months ago to say, is there anything that is important to EY that's getting missed in the shuffle, and then figuring out plans to work those in as well to make sure that anything that you guys are using and you've indicated has low samples, that we can work into various data collection exercises.
Mm-hmm.
And that's irrelevant of the PCF. I mean, if the measure that you're interested is only available in PCF 6, then we'll go create a data collection instrument, or we'll go field a project, to get that kind of thing. And internal controls is a great example of that. I'm sure that you have some internal controls metrics that are in the finance area that you're interested in. We may have to go do some field work on that.
That's why, like, the original kind of the whole thing about us even moving on our website to the topics instead of the whole the changes that John was suggesting in the beginning is a lot because we are collecting against multiple versions of PCFs and industry versions, and not just multiple versions of the cross industry, but also the industry one. So it does get complicated. So that was the first suggestion, to move to that topic area.
This is actually, that being said, this might be a very weird question to ask. Do you have the list of potential metrics that you're trying to not collect in the future that will be removed from the listing?
So I don't know how
Because
to answer that.
Yeah, that kind of worries some because of the fact, well, if there's a particular you mentioned that yes, we could go back and collect data for, but that kind of worries some. I mean, I can't speak for others, but for myself, that it kind of worries us whether if we don't collect that in the future, I mean, the clients or petitioners will ask for their like the continuity, the integrity of that particular metrics. Why is that not being collected now, but it was before?
Yeah,
Well,
and I will say that we don't, and that's why it's hard for me to answer this. Is we don't intentionally stop collecting data. I mean, that's generally not the case. There are very few situations where we just say, you know what, we're not going to collect that anymore. And I mentioned internal controls as a great example of it. The internal controls data that feeds our database comes from the survey that's on our website. We haven't sought outbound data collection where we're going to actively call people to get them to submit data to us on that, because our members haven't really demanded it. And as Kathy mentioned, you guys told us what you're interested in, and right now we're building data collection plans to get you data. So I don't think it's a statement that we just will stop collecting something. The cases where that happens are where we redefine what that thing is and we replace it with something else that's very similar.
So,
or if people aren't responding, but we have the ability to look at what people are licensing across the board, so not just EY but everybody. And so things that people are licensing, we know we have to keep collecting against that. And we also see which ones people are responding to on the surveys that we have online. So if there's an issue where nobody's giving us information because they don't understand it, or a new measure comes up that seems a duplicate, that's when you see us discontinuing, and that's when we'll say, hey, this one's been deprecated. But
okay. So that
it's not
being
like we put like a list out there and say, we decided no on all these. They happen on a case-by-case basis as something happens around the metric that tells us, hey, this is no longer something that's valid for whatever reason.
Okay. So that means regardless of the PCF, whether 6.0 or any kind of 7.0 or others, data is being collected. It's just a matter of tagging it to which PCF. Am I correct with that?
Correct.
So, all right. Then, if that's the given case, I think I do agree with Kendall. Have an EY version and include variants of PCF. Then
It
because
was your idea, SJ. I'm not taking credit for that.
I mean, if that's a variance into the sector, so we put variance as the other sector-specific PCF into the EY PCF version, and then do a little mapping if if it's possible, because data is there and data has been collected in metrics level. It's just that the PCF is not being tagged into the 6.0 or 7.0. However, we could tag it back to the EY version of PCF. Then we will. I can't say for APQC, but I'll be happy for EY.
Well, if you guys are happy, that makes us happy. I mean, because if that's just how we work. We want to make you happy.
So I'm wondering, John, if since like this is kind of the direction that EY wants to go in, that we step back now and kind of put our heads together and say, here's how we would propose that works, and then set up another call to walk through our ideas with you and see if we're on the same page, and what some options are with that train of thought, if you guys having your own EY PCF.
Yeah, that sounds like a great next step.
Carolina, what do you think?
I haven't really, to be honest, I haven't really thought about this. It's more complex than when I thought. But I think that having our own PCF is going to be great for us. It will mean a lot of work for both parts, from us developing it and from APQC to keep up with us. But I really don't see other option right now.
So let's say it's like a Lego block. I mean, it's saying EY PCF, but we have a base of PCF. Let's say 7.0 we start off with. So we'll be just cherry picking all those variants of sector-specific PCF and plug it in the EY version. Is what I have thought in mind, because that way it really kind of lessens.
I'm not worried about the sector-specific PCF, because we can work with that. We can find a work around that, because we also have our own frameworks for sectors. I'm more worried about missing data because because of the update of the cross-industry PCF. That's what's worried me the most. I don't want to, like the example with having 13 different processes against having 12. When we move from one to another one, there's going to be data missing there. I just want to have the best we can have, or the biggest, the most data we can have. That's the only thing that worries me. It's like moving from our current PCF that I understand maybe you are not collecting all the data that we need, so maybe our data set is not really refreshed because APQC has already moved to a new version of the PCF to collect data. But if we go to the new version, we might also lose data that we already have with the old one, and that it's not good enough right now at the 7.1 or 7.2, the latest version. That's the thing that worries me the most.
Yeah.
I don't want to lose anything.
That is a valid concern, Carolina, and I'll give you an example, again, a concrete example. There are that split that we did in version 6 to version 7, where we took category 4 and we split it into 2 different categories. There were probably measures that addressed the one category in version 6 that, while still relevant, aren't being actively collected on. So we could collect them if we wanted to, but we've decided that the world has told us that they look at things differently, and we need to collect according to version 7, which has split that into 2 different measures now. So what you're saying is that now you have your old measure that was aligned to version 6 that everyone expects to be there and to be fresh, but APQC has moved to the next generation, which is splitting it into 2, one for products and one for services. So now we have these 2 different measures that are being refreshed, and your old one hasn't been refreshed. That's a real problem, and it's not necessarily one that's insurmountable. I think that it's an opportunity for you to reevaluate how you communicate the value of the metric, that specific metric, to your clients, and consider that you want to move with us into the next generation of collection. In situations where you don't want to move with us, we should probably establish some kind of agreement or plan about the longevity of it, or how long we'll keep refreshing these things, or if it's going to get 1 data point every year versus 100 data points every year. We haven't ever had that kind of conversation.
And that is the conversation that I think we should have, because that is, I think for me, that's what is going to trigger our decision about moving or not to the new PCF. And then we can discuss if we want to, apart from moving to the new version of the PCF, if we also want to create our own PCF version to incorporate all the sector-specific frameworks or processes. So what you are saying now is that in this example, you almost stop collecting data for 4.0 in the 6.0 version. So for that process, data is not being refreshed because you are now collecting data in a different way, because that's what the market asks you to do. So for that particular process, we might not be having the best or the latest data. So in that case, we need to move. It's like because you are not giving us updated data. That's why it's like, that's the decision we need to know, or that's the information we need to know to make a good decision.
Right, and I will say that, and we do support collection of older metrics as well as new metrics simultaneously. So if we get a survey submission from somebody who gives us data with aligned to PCF version 6, we'll process it and give them it, and that metric sample size will increase by 1. So, and that goes back to the concept I was trying to say, that we don't ever really try not to get rid of measures because of this exact thing. People depend on the understanding, but we have this sort of dual responsibility of maintenance of the things that we've created, but also not allowing those things to become irrelevant. We have to maintain relevancy as the world changes. So, and I think that's really what the conversation is how do we maintain relevancy in the licensing that we've done and value the things. Because I will be very honest, Carolina, if you told us tomorrow that you wanted us to take the 6.0 measures and collect brand new data for them and keep them refreshed as a part of the contract, we would find a way to do that in the contract or whatever it is. I mean, Kathy would find a business way to make it happen. We haven't eliminated that infrastructure. So
well, and I think, John, I mean, in essence, we are doing that. I mean,
exactly.
that's our whole thing. We've been going through, like I said earlier, we look at several things when we look at refresh. So when John's giving the example, it's also more of a hypothetical example, because we go through and look at what are the things that are licensed on a regular basis, and what are the things that we have big contracts behind that we need to maintain, and those get refreshed. And we also look at, like, your heat map, like I said, we've been looking at for months to say, where can we weave stuff in, because these are the ones EY has and we want to keep refreshing them. So it's not like it's not like there's a list that we say, oh, we're just stopping this. We look at multiple things to understand where we need to be refreshing data.
Okay.
I do get the I do get the efforts there, but if the customers or any of the participants of the survey are data providers, when you collect data, are actually providing data for the newly updated, let's say the new generation metrics, it just kind of questions me, would they ever, provide data for the old metrics if we need them?
Well, the data that we get from the website that people come and they give to us is the least amount of data that we get. The most data that we get is where John is doing proactive data collections with his team.
Okay.
That's where the majority of the data comes from.
So, and during that proactive data collection piece, so regardless of being a new generation metrics and old generation or old metrics, it could be collected if they're willing to provide data for.
Yeah, and that's what we were saying before. We collect data against multiple PCF versions, both the multiple cross-industry versions as well as industry versions too.
And now that goes into the sample sizes differences, because you can merge, since you cannot merge the two different, the new generation and old metrics, it will be counted separately, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. So how do we proceed?
Well, are you interested in us going down the path of looking at what an EY standard PCF would look like, as far as how we could support what APQC would do, what you guys would do, and kind of roll out how it would work in our minds?
I think so. SJ, Carolina?
Yes.
Sorry, as I was mute. Yes, I agree. That it's
okay. Why don't we group on our side, give us, a little bit of time, a week to 2 weeks, to pull together some, basically a plan for you, and outline, where we would see roles and responsibilities on both sides, what we can do to support you, how we would envision it working from the refresh side. And then we can send that to you, let you kind of soak it up, and then set up another call. Will that work?
Yeah. Yeah, we really appreciate your partnership on this. We're just trying to figure out the best way to continue utilizing your data, but still make it easy and digestible for our practitioners who have to be in that field mapping the processes.
Right, and that's what we want too. We want to make sure that it's not a painful process to use the data, that it's something that works within your business model.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, cool. Well,
Great.
We'll get back together, and then we'll work quickly but detailed, and I'll come back to you when I have something to show you, and we can all review together.
Okay. Sounds like a plan.
Okay.
Thank you very much. We really
everyone.
appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Take care.